Cora Hollis was up to her elbows in the flank of a blue roan gelding that 3 grown men had already quit on, when her stepmother's voice carried across the yard and told her to leave the animal and go feed the drifter at the back step. She did not leave the animal. Not right away. The roan called Blue had come to the Hollis Place green and frightened in the spring of 1884. Quick with his feet and quicker to spook, and by high summer he had thrown Dutch Pharaoh twice and struck the Peterson boy once, and the word around the corrals was that he was spoiled clean through and ought to be sold off cheap to any fool willing to take him off the place. Cora did not think he was spoiled. She thought he had been handled by men who mistook fear for meanness and answered it with a doubled rope, and that was a different thing entirely, and it could be untaught by anybody with the patience for it. She had the patience for it. Most mornings she had very little else. So she kept her hand moving down the roan's flank, slow and flat and even, until she felt the long muscle under the hide give up its knot and the animal breathe out through his nose. Only then did she straighten, wipe both palms down the front of her canvas apron, and go and see about the drifter at the back step. He was standing at the head of the lane, holding a tired dun horse by the cheek strap, hat in his free hand, waiting to be told whether he could come the rest of the way in. He had the look of a man who had been on the road a good while, and slept out more nights than not. His coat had been good canvas once, and had a torn pocket now. His boots were run down at the heel. The dun under his hand was honest and plain and worn to the bone, the kind of horse a man rides when he is not particular about being looked at. Cora took all of it in the way she took in weather, and then she looked at his hands on the strap, because hands were the one thing that never learned to lie, and his were easy on the leather light, a horseman's hands, and that did not fit the rest of him, and she filed it away without knowing yet what it meant. "You after work or supper?" she asked him. "Both, if there's either going," he said. "Fence work. I heard down at Rycross. Your outfit's short-handed before the snow." "We're short-handed most of the year," Cora said. "Wait here." She went and found her father on the porch, where he sat most afternoons now with his bad hands folded in his lap, and told him a man was in the lane asking after the fence work. Amos Hollis looked past her at the drifter and the dun, and did the arithmetic he did about everything these days, which was the arithmetic of what a thing cost against what there was. Fence a mile short before winter, and a man asking day wages and a corner to sleep in. It came out in favor of the man. "He got a name?" Amos said. "Didn't ask," said Cora. "Ask," she went back down. "My father wants to know your name." "Wade," the drifter said. She waited for the rest of it, and it did not come, and she decided a man's name was his own business as long as his fence held, and she did not ask again. That was the first mistake, and it belonged to all of them, and none of them would understand for 9 days that they had made it. "You can put the dun in the far pen, and there's a room off the calving shed with a cot in it," she said. "Supper's at the back step, not the house. My stepmother's particular about the house." Something moved behind his eyes when she said the back step, not the house, and it was not offense, it was interest, the way a man looks up when a thing he suspected turns out to be true. She did not read it right. She had no reason to read it at all. "Back step suits me fine," Wade said, and led the dun toward the pens, and that was how the richest man in the north of the territory came to be sleeping in a shed on the Hollis place, with a torn coat and a horse nobody would look at twice, 1 week before he was expected there in a good coat with the whole valley watching. The Hollis place had been a fair little outfit once, in the years before Cora's mother was buried, when the grass came up thick in the bottoms and the creek ran the summer through. It sat on a dusty flat south of Rycross, with the 2 Medicine Country blue on the north skyline, and the county had a joke about it that Cora had heard her whole life. "All dust and no diamond," they said. Dutch Pharaoh said it to sneer, and her father said it into his coffee, like a man reading his own verdict, and the difference between the two men was that Dutch believed it, and Amos was afraid it was so. 2 hard winters had taken most of what the good years built. The cattle Amos had borrowed against went down in the storms of '82 and the spring that followed. And the note he had signed to buy them did not go down with them. It sat at the Rycross Bank getting older and meaner, $600 of it, due on the 1st of December with the interest. And everyone in the house knew the figure, and nobody said it out loud, the way a family will not say the name of a thing that sleeps in the next room. What kept the place standing at all was Cora, and everyone on it knew the fact and none of them said it, because a family that has come down in the world would rather not look too hard at the one holding the floor up. She kept the books, such as they were, in a hand her father could no longer manage since the cold of 2 winters back took the feeling out of 3 fingers of his right hand. She doctored the stock and pulled the calves that came wrong, and mended the gate that Dutch left hanging, and split the wood when Dutch was off spending his wages in Rycross, which was oftener than her father would allow was true. She had done a man's work on the flat since she was 15 and her mother took to bed, and a man's and a woman's both since her mother was buried on the little rise behind the house, and in those 4 years she had learned the one thing the household most needed her not to learn, that she did not need any of them by half so much as they needed her. She never said it. There was no profit in saying it, and Cora Hollis had a horror of being pitied that ran deeper than any wish to be praised, so she let them think what was easiest, that she was a plain, hard woman with no prospects who was lucky to have a roof, and she carried the roof on her back and let them go on believing she lived under it rather than held it up. The one grief she could not quite swallow was the gray dress. It had been her mother's good dress, and Cora had cut it down and patched it and worn it thin, and when Naomi looked at it and sighed, as Naomi always did, Cora heard under the sigh the suggestion that she ought to let the past go and be dressed sensibly at her father's expense, and she would sooner have gone barefoot in the snow. The dress was the last of her mother, and the last thing on the flat that was purely her own, and she wore it like a flag that nobody else in the county had learned yet how to read. Into that quiet, 4 days before Wade rode up the lane, a letter had come. Cora had not been meant to read it, and had read it anyway, standing in the kitchen with the flower still on her wrists, because her stepmother had left it open on the table like a thing she wanted found. It was from a lawyer in the county seat, and it was brief and courteous, and it changed the weather of the whole house. Mr. Wade Ashcroft, of the Diamond on the 2 Medicine Bench, would do the Hollis family the honor of calling within the fortnight, with a view. The letter put it as gently as a letter can put such a thing, to a closer acquaintance with the household, and to a discussion of the note presently held against the home place, which Mr. Ashcroft's late father had bought up from the Rycross Bank the year before he died. Cora had set the letter down and understood it all at once, the whole shape of it. The way you understand a hand of cards laid face up. The Diamond owned the paper on the ranch. The Diamond's owner, a man none of them had ever laid eyes on, was coming to look them over. And her stepmother had left the letter where Cora would read it, so that Cora would understand, without anyone having to say it to her face, that she was not the daughter under discussion. She was right about that. She was entirely right. It is Lavinia he'll want. If he wants anybody, and there's no sense pretending otherwise. Naomi said that evening, not to Cora but across her, the way she said most things. They were in the kitchen, the 3 women, and Lavinia was standing on a kitchen chair in the blue wool, with pins in the hem and her pretty face gone pink, with the strangeness of being the subject. A man like that doesn't ride 40 miles for conversation. He'll want a young wife who can carry herself in front of company and give him no trouble. And that is your sister, and our whole business between now and the fortnight is to see that nothing about this place gives him a reason to think twice. Nothing about this place, Cora said, or nothing about me. Naomi did not flinch. That was the thing about Naomi. She never flinched, because she never believed she had said anything but sense. You're a grown woman of 24 who could shoe his horse and argue his fence line and tell him to his face that his herd count was soft, she said. And there is not a man in this territory who wants that at his own supper table, Cora. And the sooner you make peace with it, the kinder your life will be. I am not being cruel. I am being the only one in this house who will say the true thing to you. When Mr. Ashcroft comes, you will keep to the barn and the yard where you do good, and you will keep out of the front rooms, and you will not correct anybody about anything. Can you do that for your father, if not for me? He owes $600, and he is out of winters. And there it was, laid on the table between the flour and the pins. The price of Cora's silence was her father's roof. She looked at Lavinia up on the chair, pink and miserable and not meeting her eye, and she found she had no anger for the girl, who had asked for none of it, and was as much a thing being arranged as the fence and the supper. Cora had all her anger for the arrangement itself, and she folded it up small and put it away, because there was nowhere in that kitchen to set it down. I'll keep to the barn, she said. Thank you, said Naomi, and meant it, which was worse. Wade Ashcroft mended fence for the Hollis outfit for 9 days, and he was good at it, which surprised Dutch Pharaoh and did not surprise Cora, because she had seen his hands on the cheek strap. He set his corner posts deep and tamped them in layers and did not leave a brace half done to knock off early, and he was quiet in the way that let a place forget he was in it, which was, though nobody knew it, exactly the way he had planned to be. He saw a great deal in those 9 days. He saw that the fence he was hired to mend was the fence a man would see from the lane, and that nobody had asked him to touch the far drift fence along the creek that was down in 3 places, and let the neighbors' cattle in every night. He saw a herd count in the tally book. Dutch showed it to him, proud, the second day. That did not match the cattle he could count with his own eyes on the flat, and he understood the count was being written for a reader who had not come yet. He saw a family holding its breath. And he saw Cora. He saw her before daylight most mornings, out at the round pen, with the blue roan while the house still slept, and he learned to come down early and lean on the far rail with a cup of coffee and watch, because it was the best thing on the place to watch, and because it told him more about the outfit than the tally book did. She did not rope the roan, and she did not crowd him. She stood in the middle of the pen and let the horse come apart and put himself back together in his own time. And she talked to him low and steady the whole while, and by the 4th morning the roan was dropping his head to her chest and letting her walk under his neck, and by the 7th she was up on his back bareback in the gray light, with a hand full of mane, turning him slow figures with her seat and her voice and nothing else. Wade Ashcroft had bred and made horses his whole life, and had 40 men who could ride, and he stood at that rail with his cooling coffee, and knew that he was watching something none of his 40 could do, being done by a woman her own family had told to keep out of the front rooms. He had come down to the Hollis place half hoping to find a reason not to go through with the thing his lawyer had arranged. He had let the note his father bought up sit unspoken for a year because he did not know what he wanted with it, and when at last he allowed the letter to be sent, he had done it in the flat spirit of a man discharging a duty, and had ridden down ahead of it in his torn coat, half wishing to find the family so plainly grasping, or the daughter so plainly on offer, that he could go home and tell himself he had looked and there was nothing there worth the trouble. He had found all the grasping a man could wish for. He had also found, out at the round pen in the gray mornings, the one thing he had stopped believing he would ever come across, which was a person doing a hard thing beautifully for no audience and no wage and no reason at all, except that the thing was worth doing right. He watched her read the roan the way he himself read a horse, and better. And he understood that she was not gentling the animal by softness alone, which any fool with a kind heart could attempt, and most of them got kicked for their trouble. She was gentling him by being relentlessly, minutely fair, by never once asking the horse for a thing she had not first made simple and safe for him to give, and by never letting a small fright go unanswered until it grew into a large one. It was, Wade thought, leaning on the rail with his coffee going cold in his hand, an entire way of being with a frightened creature. And he had a strong suspicion the horse was not the only thing on that place it might be applied to, and he caught himself wondering what it would be to be handled that patiently by anybody at all. And then he made himself think about fence line for a while, because he was a grown man, and it was 6 a.m. Popcorn came and leaned on the rail beside him one of those mornings and said nothing for a good while, and then said, around the stem of his pipe, she made that horse out of nothing. Wasn't a hand on this place would give a plug dollar for him back in July. A pause and a long look across the pen. Wasn't a hand on this place would give a plug dollar for her either. Come to that, which tells you the worth of the hands on this place, and not much about the horse or the woman. And he knocked out his pipe on the rail and went off to his morning, and Wade stood where he was and privately agreed with every word of it. That's a spoiled horse, Dutch told him at the woodpile one noon, following Wade's eye out to the pen. Threw me twice. She'll get herself hurt fooling with him, and then we'll have to put him down after all, and she'll cry over it like it was a person. Woman's got no business on the back of an outlaw. No business on the back of anything, you ask me. That's the trouble with this whole place. He spat. All dust and no diamond. Wade said nothing to that. He had learned that saying nothing was the surest way to be told everything, and Dutch was a man who could not stand a silence, and always filled it with more than he meant to. He learned from Dutch that the roan had been broken a doubled rope in a single hot afternoon in July. And he did the arithmetic, and understood that the horse was not spoiled at all. He was frightened by an expert, and being unfrightened by a better one, and that the man who told the story could not tell the difference, and the woman who did the work could. They were kept apart, the two of them, across all of it. That was Naomi's doing, and it was the shape of the whole house. But it was also, though neither of them would have said so, the only way either of them could bear the other's company, at the length of a fence, across the width of the yard, over the top rail of the pen. A look would cross the gap and go back, and the work would go on. On the third day she brought him water at the far fence, because it was a hot afternoon and nobody else would think to. And she set the bucket down a full stride from him and stepped back before she spoke, and they talked across the stride. You set a good post, she said, better than we've had. You could get on anywhere doing that. Why here? Heard the pay was fair, Wade said. The pay is not fair, Cora said. The pay is day wages and a cot in a shed, and you know it. And a man who works like you do knows what he's worth, so that's not the reason. You don't have to tell me the reason. I only wanted you to know I'm not the one you have to lie to on this place. Save it for the ones it works on. He looked at her a moment across the stride of dry grass, and something in his face was working that she could not name. I'll remember that, he said, and it came out more serious than the moment seemed to want, and she picked up the empty bucket and went, and did not see him stand a long while at the fence, with the wires slack in his hands, looking after her. On the 5th day a cow went into the creek, and very nearly did not come out again. And it told Wade Ashcroft more about Cora Hollis than all the mornings at the round pen rail put together, because a person shows you who they are in a hurry. It was an old brindle cow heavy in calf, and she had gone down the cut bank after the green grass at the water's edge and bogged herself to the belly in the Black Creek mud, where the spring ran cold even under the sun. And by the time the Peterson dog fetched the men down she was in past, helping by any road the men could see. Dutch stood on the bank and looked at her and said the thing there were $600 worth of reasons to say, which was that she was one cow, and the calf in her was only next spring's, and the mud had her fast. And a man could labor till dark and lose a good rope and his temper both, and be no further on. He said it the way he said everything, as though hard sense excused a man from the trouble of trying, and two of the hands were already half nodding along, because it is a great deal easier to agree with quitting than with work. Cora came down the bank at a hard run with a coil of rope over her shoulder, and did not so much as glance at Dutch. She looked at the cow, and at the set of the mud, and at the lay of the bank, and she did the whole sum of it in her head in the time the men took to shrug. And then she began giving orders, and the strange thing, the thing Wade would keep, was that the men took them. Not because she had any rank on that place, for she had none, but because she was the one soul on the bank who plainly knew what to do, and a frightened animal and a running creek will make men follow the one who knows over the one who owns, every time. "Bring me the roan," she said, "and bring the wide breeching off the wagon harness, not a saddle. Pap, get down on the low side with a plank under her fore, and keep it there. You." And here she turned, and found the drifter, Wade, already at the top of the cut, with his coat off and his sleeves going up, because he had read the thing as fast as she had, and was only waiting to be told where to stand. "You're big, and you're steady. Get in the water on her offside, keep her head up out of it, and don't let her wear herself out fighting you, and mind she doesn't roll onto you when she comes." And Wade Ashcroft, who had 40 men and never got wet if he did not choose to, went down the cold bank into the Black Creek mud on the word of a woman in a patched dress, and put his shoulder up under the neck of a bogged cow, and held her great heaving head up out of the water while the mud tried to take his boots, and did exactly as he was told, and found he was glad to. She rigged the wide breeching around the cow's hindquarters the way a rope alone can never be rigged, without cutting an animal in half, padded and broad, and she set the roan to it, the spoiled roan, the outlaw, the horse 3 men had quit on. And she stood at his head and talked him into the pull, low and even, and the roan leaned into the harness and held the lean, steady as a fence post, no plunge and no scramble, taking the strain up soft and keeping it there, while the mud gave the cow back an inch at a time, with a sound like the earth being unwilling to let go. It took the better part of an hour. The old cow came up the low side onto Pap's plank and lay in the grass, blowing and shuddering, and thoroughly put out with the whole business, and her calf came sound the next month, and that brindle would raise 3 more after it. Cora was mud to the shoulder and soaked clean through the gray dress, and did not appear to notice. She went over the cow with her hands, feeling along the joints for a wrench and finding none, and then she straightened and looked at the roan standing quiet in the wide harness, with his sides heaving, and something crossed her face that she showed to no person and to every horse, and she rubbed him hard along the jaw, and told him he was worth 10 of any man on the place, and did not trouble to lower her voice, and Dutch on the bank heard it, and went the color of the creek mud. Wade climbed out of the water black to the waist. He said nothing clever. He looked at the woman and the roan and the cow safe in the grass and the whole thing she had just made happen out of a wreck the owner's own foreman had signed off on, and what he felt was not, to his own considerable surprise, admiration exactly. It was nearer to relief. It was the relief of a man who has spent his whole life being the most capable person in every yard he stands in, feeling for once that if the ground opened under his own feet, there was somebody near who would know what to do, and would not first need convincing that he was worth the pulling out. "You'll want to get dry," Cora told him, plainly, across the muddy grass with the blowing cow between them. "There's dry sacking in the calving shed, and I'll not have a hired man take a chill on my account. You did well in the water. Most men fight a bogged cow. You held her. That's the harder thing, and the righter one. It was the first word of praise anyone had given him on the Hollis place, and it was for holding a cow's head up out of a creek, and it was worth more to him than any drawing room in 3 counties had ever once managed to be. And he took himself off to the shed to get dry, so that she would not see what his face was doing about it. The harvest supper came on the 6th night, and it was the nearest thing to a party the flat had all year. The Petersons and the Kynes and old Pap Quorn and a dozen others crowded into the Hollis front room with the good lamp lit, and Naomi's whole reputation riding on the table. Cora was allowed in for it, because a family that hid a grown daughter entirely would be talked about worse than one that owned an odd one. She wore the gray dress. She always wore the gray dress. It was the only thing she owned that was hers, and not handed down or borrowed, cut down from her mother's own, with the patch at the hip and the patch above the knee. And she had worn it to the graveside 4 winters back, and she wore it now, plain among the calico and the one blue wool, on purpose, because she would rather be seen plain than be seen pretending. Naomi found a way to mention the dress. Naomi always found a way. "You must forgive Cora her working clothes," she said warmly to Mrs. Peterson, loud enough for the table, patting Cora's hand where it lay on the cloth. "She has no patience for finery. Our Cora never has. It's why she'll make some plain man a fine partner one day, if a plain enough man can be found for her." Laughter, soft and awful, ran around the table, the laughter of people agreeing with something they would not have said themselves. "I only worry," Naomi went on, gentle as a knife going in gentle, "that we've let her get too used to the barn. A woman gets a name for that." Cora took her hand out from under Naomi's and did not answer, because she had learned that answering was the very thing they wanted, a flash of the blunt tongue to prove the point Naomi had just made for the table, and she would not hand it to them. She looked at her plate. Down the board, Lavinia, who was 20 and pretty and had been told her whole life that her face was the family's one good asset, looked at her elder sister with a misery she had no way to speak, and under the cloth where no one could see, she found Cora's hand and held it. Hard, an apology for a thing she had not done and could not stop. Cora pressed back once to tell the girl it was no fault of hers, and neither of them looked at the other, and that was the whole of what passed between them, and it was not nothing. Old Pap Quorn changed the subject loudly and badly to the price of beef, which he did not care a straw about, because Pap could not abide the way the harvest supper went every single year, and had no other tool to hand for the stopping of it. The talk moved along, and the good lamp burned, and Naomi was content, believing the evening a success, believing she had fixed for the neighbors the exact place of every soul in the house, so that when the diamond came there could be no confusion about who was on offer and who was to be kept out by the barn. She managed her hopes the way another woman keeps a front parlor, and tonight, to her own mind, the parlor was in perfect order. Wade Ashcroft was not at the table. He was a hired hand and ate at the back step, and he was sitting on the back step that very moment with a plate on his knee, close enough through the open kitchen door to hear every word of it. He heard the laughter. He heard the warm cruelty of the dress. And then he heard the back door, and Cora came out onto the step with a second plate in her hands, and set it down beside him without a word, and sat down on the step too, a decent foot of pine board between them, and ate her supper out there in the cold with the drifter rather than at the good table in the warm, and did not explain herself, and did not cry, and after a while said only, "The pie's worth staying for. She's a hard woman, but she can bake. You don't have to sit out here in the cold," he said, not looking at her, looking out at the dark yard. "You'll catch it worse than any weather from your stepmother, come morning." "I've caught it from my stepmother most mornings since I was 18, Cora said. "I'm hardened to that particular front." She ate a while. "Besides, I don't care for the company inside tonight, and I find I don't much mind the company out here. You don't talk unless you've a thing worth saying. That's a rare quality in a man. Most of them talk to fill the quiet, and what falls out is generally how much they know about some work they've never once done with their own hands. And what have you decided I've done with mine? He asked her. She considered him in the lamplight falling out the window. Horses, she said. You watch mine like a man reading a letter from home. And you set a post like you've set 1,000 of them and been too good for every one. Which means you've done work beneath you and had your reasons for it. And you gave my father the front half of a name and kept the back half in your pocket. She shrugged. The rest is yours to keep. I only wanted you to know I've got eyes in my head. People forget that about the plain ones. They take plain to mean blind. She went back to her pie. Anyhow, you held my old cow up out of that creek today, when Dutch was all for handing her over to the water. I'll not forget it, whatever else you turn out to be. A man's told by what he does when a thing's going under, and there's no wage at all in the saving of it. They ate the pie on the back step in the dark, a foot apart, and the lamplight and the laughter fell out the window over both of them, and Wade Ashcroft, who had come to this flat to find out what a family was like when it did not know the diamond was watching, sat there and found out. And something in him that had been out on the road a long time came off the road for good. On the 7th day, Wade did a thing nobody had asked him to do, which was to start in on the drift fence along the creek. The far fence, the one that did not show from the lane, and had been down in 3 places all summer, letting the neighbor's stock drift over onto what little grass the Hollis cattle had left. It was hard, wet, thankless work in the willows, and it earned him nothing. Since Amos had hired him for the fence a rich man would see from the road, and Wade did it anyway, on his own time, in the last hour of light, because he had never once in his life been able to look at a job that needed doing and walk past it, and because some quiet part of him wanted to learn whether a single person on the place would notice. One person noticed. Cora came down the creek at dusk with a hank of wire she had not been asked to bring, and found him splicing the second gap, and she stood off a few feet in the willows and watched him work a moment, and then, without a word, set to on the third gap upstream, and they mended the drift fence together in the last of the light, 40 feet apart, not talking, the cold creek running between them, each working toward the other's gap until the whole line came up tight and singing. When it was done, they stood on the bank in the near dark, with the mended wire humming faint in the wind between them, and Cora said, "You know my father won't pay you for this. This isn't the fence he hired." "I know it," Wade said. "Then why do it?" "Same reason you're down here in the dark stringing wire nobody'll thank you for," he said. The cattle drift through the gap that doesn't show the same as through the one that does. A fence you only mend where the company can see it isn't a fence. It's a picture of one. He tied off and straightened up. "I've never had any use for a picture of a thing. I'd sooner have a plain true thing that holds than a fine false one that doesn't, in a fence, or in a family, or in a—" And he stopped himself there, because he had been about to say a great deal more than a hired man had any business saying, and she looked at him across the mended gap and waited to see whether he would finish it, and he did not, and she let him keep it. "You're a strange one, Wade," she said, not unkindly, gathering up her wire. "You talk like a man who's had money and set it down, or had it and never wanted it. I can't make you out at all." She started up the bank, and stopped, and said back over her shoulder the thing that would come to her hard in a few days' time. "But whatever you are or were, you mend the fence that doesn't show. There's not 3 men in this county I'd say as much of. Good night," and she went on up through the willows to the lit house, and Wade stood a long while by the true strung fence in the dark, holding what she had said the way a man holds a live coal, and not one bit easier in his own mind for the having of it. On the 9th evening, she did the thing that turned the story, and she did it out of plain decency, which is the only way the good ones ever get themselves into trouble. She found him by the calving shed after dark, greasing the reach on the hay wagon by lantern, because the axle had been screaming all week, and nobody else would fix a thing that did not show. She stood in the door of the shed with the lantern between them and watched him work for a moment. And then she said what she had come to say. "You've been square with us, and I'm going to be square with you," Cora said. "There's a man coming this week. Ashcroft, from the Diamond. Rich as the whole North End, and he owns the paper on this place. And my father and my stepmother are getting the house up for him like it's a coronation. Everything you can see from the lane's been mended for his eyes. The count in that book you were shown is nearer a wish than a herd. And when he comes, they'll stand my sister in front of him in the blue wool, and stand the whole family next to a story that isn't true, and I can't stop any of it." Wade set the grease can down slow. "Why tell me?" "Because I've watched you break your back on our fence for day wages, 9 days running, and never once heard you lie about anything," she said, "and I'll not have a decent working man taken in by association. When that rich man's here, whatever they put in front of him, don't you go standing next to it. A lie doesn't care whose coat it's wearing. It'll put yours on same as ours." She let out a breath. "That's all. I'd have wanted somebody to tell me." He was quiet a long moment in the lantern light. "And you?" he said. "What do you want out of the rich man's coming?" "Nothing," Cora said. "I'm not one of the things being shown. I'll be in the barn." She almost left it there. But he was only a drifter, gone by Sunday, and there was a freedom in telling the truth to a man who could carry it away off the place. So she said the rest of it. "You want to know the truth of it? I'd sooner hold this ground with my own 2 hands and lose it clean than be handed across a table to pay my father's note. A woman married to clear a debt is just the debt in a nicer dress. I'd rather be broke and my own than kept and somebody's payment. That probably sounds like foolishness to a man sleeping in a shed." "No," Wade said, and his voice had gone strange. "No, it doesn't." She looked at him a beat longer, decided she'd said more than she'd meant to, and took the lantern and left him there in the dark by the wagon. And Wade Ashcroft stood in that dark a long time, because she had just told him, without knowing it, that the one thing he could do to end this, walk up to the house in the morning and say his whole name, and set the note aside, and lift the whole family out of the hole with a stroke of a pen, and take her out of the barn, was the exact thing she had said she would rather lose everything than have done to her. He had come in a torn coat to find out who she was when nobody important was watching, and he had found out, and the finding had built him a wall he could not climb. The moment he said his name, everything after it became a rescue, and she would not be rescued. She had just told him so in the dark, thinking she was only being kind to a passing stranger. The trouble came the next afternoon, and it came, as trouble on a nervous place does, out of somebody else's fear. Naomi's mother's brooch went missing from the box on the mantel, a gold and jet mourning brooch, the one good piece of jewelry in the house. The piece Lavinia was to wear when the diamond came. It was there in the morning and gone by 3, and the house came apart. Naomi was white with it, because to her the loss was not a brooch, it was the last inch of respectability she had left to dress her hope in. And a frightened woman looks for somewhere to put the fear, and Dutch Pharaoh handed her a place to put it. "There's a drifter been sleeping in the shed 9 days, Dutch said, in the yard loud in front of everyone. Nobody knows his name past Wade. Nobody knows where he's from. And now there's a gold brooch walked off. I'd look in that shed room before I looked any place else." He was enjoying it. He had never liked the way the quiet man set a better post than he did. They looked in the shed room. They made Wade stand in the yard with his torn coat open while Dutch went through his war bag and his bedroll and turned out the pockets of the good canvas, once coat, and there was nothing in any of it, of course, but the search itself was the punishment. The standing there while a family that had eaten his work for 9 days decided out loud whether he was a thief. Amos would not meet his eye. Naomi's mouth was a line. And Wade Ashcroft, who could have ended it in one sentence, who had only to say send to the Rycross Bank and ask them whose signature clears the diamond's drafts, and watch the whole yard fall to its knees, stood there and took it, and said nothing, because the sentence that saved him was the same sentence that lost him. And he had made his choice in the dark by the wagon the night before. It was Cora who ended it. She came out of the barn into the middle of it and stood in the gap of the yard, and said, flat and carrying, he didn't take it. "You don't know that," Dutch said. "I know he set 40 posts this week and left every one of them true," Cora said. "And I know a man who won't leave a brace half done, doesn't pocket a widow's brooch, and I know something else besides. I know blue's been at the mantle. Silence, that roan's been loose in the yard twice this week, because somebody, she did not look at Dutch, and everybody looked at Dutch, left the pen gate on the drop latch, and he's a magpie, that horse. He'll lip anything that shines and carry it off. It's half why the men called him spoiled. Somebody go look in the straw of his stall before you go through this man's pockets one more time." Pap Corn went, because Pap was the only one loose enough to move. He came back across the yard, holding the gold and jet brooch, dull with barn dust, in the flat of his old hand. He had found it worked down into the corner of the roan's stall under the manger, where a horse that likes shining things drops them when he is done playing. Nobody said sorry to Wade. Naomi took the brooch and turned, and went into the house with it and shut the door, because a woman who has been that frightened cannot bear the person who saw it. Dutch found something to do at the far end of the corrals, and Wade stood in the middle of the yard doing up the buttons of his torn coat, and looked across the width of it at Cora, who had defended a drifter against her own household at a cost she had not stopped to count, and who now shrugged one shoulder as if to say it was nothing, only the truth, and went back into the barn to see to the horse who had caused it all and forgiven none of it. Wade stood in the emptying yard and understood two things in the one moment. The first was that he had just watched a woman spend her own small standing in her own household to defend a man she believed to be a penniless stranger. Spend it without a heartbeat's hesitation and without the least thought of being repaid, against her own people, on nothing grander than the principle that a true thing ought to be said out loud, even when it costs the sayer. The second was that if he told her now who he was, in the warm rush of his gratitude, he would be handing her a coin of the very kind she had just refused to let anyone hand him. He would be paying her back. And he had watched her long enough by now to know precisely how Cora Hollis took being paid back for a plain decency. She took it as an insult. So he buttoned his torn coat over the truth one more time, and said only, across the width of the yard, obliged to you, in the flat voice a hired man uses to a rancher's daughter, and she gave him the flat nod in return. And only the two of them knew that a great deal more than that had crossed the open ground between them, and neither could have put a name to it. "You keep standing up for hired men who won't tell you their whole name," Pap Corn said mildly, coming up beside her in the barn. "You're going to run out of family before you run out of strangers." "He didn't do it, Pap, no," the old man agreed. He looked out the barn door at the drifter crossing the yard, at the easy horseman's walk of him, at the plain dun in the pen that a poor man rides when he does not care to be looked at, and something moved behind Pap Corn's face that had been moving there for 2 days. "No, he surely didn't," Pap said, and he did not say the rest of what he was thinking. Because Pap Corn had 2 opinions about a stranger, and he had just that afternoon moved this one from the first to the second, and he was a man who liked to be sure before he spoke. The rich man was expected on the Saturday, and on the Friday night Wade came to the back step to leave his day's pay lying, because he had made up his mind to be gone before the diamond arrived. to ride out at first light as the drifter Wade, and come back up the lane by noon as the man he was, in the good coat, and let the two halves of himself be miles and hours apart, so that no one need ever know he had slept in their shed, and heard their laughter, and eaten their pie in the dark. It was a coward's plan, and he knew it. And he had chosen it because he could not think of a brave one that did not run straight into the wall she had built for him with her own honesty by the wagon. He did not get to ride out clean, because Cora was on the back step. "You're going," she said. It was not a question. She had seen the war bag by the shed door. "Before your company comes," Wade said. "A drifter at the shed's no help to your father's Saturday." She nodded slowly. She had known he would go, and she found she minded it more than she had any right to. This plain man she had eaten 9 suppers beside a foot apart and never once touched. "Well," she said, "you set a good post, Wade, whoever you are. Wherever you land, they'll be getting the better of the bargain. And you can tell them Cora Hollis said so." She put out her hand across the foot of pine board between them, to shake, the way she'd have shaken with any hand who'd worked square. And Wade Ashcroft looked at that offered hand, the square, scarred, capable hand of a woman who had defended him in a yard and fed him in the dark, and told him the truth by a wagon, and asked him for exactly nothing. And every plan he had made came apart, because he could not take that honest hand under a name that was only half true. "Not that hand. It's not Wade whoever," he said. "It's Wade Ashcroft." The night went very still. "The diamond isn't coming up the lane tomorrow, Cora," he said. "The diamond's been sleeping in your calving shed for 9 days. I came down plain because 3 times this year I've been announced and expected, and shown a swept yard and a scrubbed girl, and courted like a bank draft with a face, and I was sick to the back teeth of it, and I wanted one time to see a family the way it is when it doesn't know the diamond's watching. And I saw it." He made himself keep looking at her. "I heard your stepmother's speech about the dress. I stood in your yard and let them go through my pockets for a brooch, because the sentence that cleared me was my own name, and I couldn't say it. And I heard you, by the wagon, tell a drifter you'd rather lose this place clean than be handed across a table to pay a note. I heard all of it. That's who's been eating at your back step." She did not faint, and she did not weep, and she did not, as some women in the county would later swear she must have, throw herself at him. Cora Hollis took her offered hand back, slow, and folded her arms across the patched gray dress, and stood there on the step in the cold and rearranged 9 days of her life while he watched her do it. She thought of the tally book he'd been shown, and the count he must have made with his own eyes. She thought of quoting him the fence work like it was a hard bargain to a man who held the paper on the whole place. She thought of telling Wade Ashcroft, to his face in the dark, that she would rather be broke and her own than be Wade Ashcroft's paid-for bride. And she felt the heat come up her neck, not the heat of a girl caught out, but a hard, clean anger. And when she spoke it was low and it shook. "So this was a test," she said. "You rode down here in a torn coat to see was I honest when I didn't know it counted. And I passed. Is that it? Do I get told I passed?" "Cora, you let them search you for a thief to keep your secret," she said over him, "and that's your business. That's a brave enough thing and a foolish one. But you sat on that step, and let me tell you the truest thing I've got, that I'd rather lose everything than be somebody's rescue. And you let me tell it to a man who could rescue me with one signature, and you said no, it doesn't sound like foolishness, and all the while you were the very thing I was talking about. You want to know the cruelest part, Wade Ashcroft? You fixed it, so there's no way left for you to be good to me that isn't the exact thing I told you I couldn't bear. You've made a rescue out of yourself. If you pick up that note now, I'm bought. If you marry me now, I'm paid. You came down here to find an honest woman, and the finding of her cost her the only thing she had, which was the being able to say yes to a man without it being charity. I hope the test was worth what it broke. He did not defend himself, which was the only right thing left to do, and he did it. You're right, he said. In all of it. I told myself I was being careful. But a careful man doesn't need 9 days in a borrowed coat to learn whether a woman is honest. He learns it the honest way, by being honest first, and letting her decide with her eyes open whether she'll have him or send him off. I didn't give you your eyes open. I came down here to keep from being courted for my money, and to manage it, I made myself the one thing I always swore I'd never be, which is a man who lies to a woman about who he is and calls the lie a test. You didn't fail anything, Cora. I did. Don't, she said. Don't you turn it over so gracefully that I come out of it comforting you. I've had a bellyful today of people being handled, and I'll not be handled into feeling sorry for the richest man in the territory on my own back step. But the shake had gone out of her voice, and what was under it now was only a great tiredness, and something worse than anger, which was disappointment. For she had liked the drifter, had honestly liked the plain, quiet man who held her cow up out of the creek and mended the fence that did not show, and read her horse like a letter from home, and she was standing on her own step, learning that the man she had liked did not quite exist, or existed only as a coat worn over a stranger who held the paper on her father's roof. Go to bed, Wade Ashcroft, she said. You've had your good long look at us. You can write your lawyer that the Hollis family is every bit as poor and as proud and as false as you rode down here fearing. All but the barn. The barn will manage. And she went into the house and left him on the step, and it was the worst and truest thing anyone had said to him in years, for the second time. From the same woman, and he had earned every word of it. The diamond came up the lane the next day at noon, in a good coat, on a tall gray horse, with 2 diamond riders behind him leading a spare, because Wade Ashcroft had thought about it all the sleepless night and decided that if he was going to do this, he would do it in the daylight, out loud, in front of everyone, in the one way that took the rescue out of it. He had sent Papcorn down before dawn with word to the house that the diamond would arrive at noon, and that Mr. Ashcroft asked, as a particular favor, that the whole family and any neighbors who cared to come be gathered in the yard to receive him, and not in the parlor. Naomi had read the message as a rich man's grand manners, and had spent the morning half wild with it, getting Lavinia into the blue wool, getting the good chairs out into the yard, getting everything and everyone arranged on the swept dirt in the cold, bright noon. Everyone but Cora, who was in the round pen with the blue roan, in the gray dress, because she had made up her mind in the night about one thing at least, that whatever this man did in the yard, she would be doing her own work in her own clothes when he did it, and he could court a horse gentler in a patched dress in front of the county, or he could go home. And either way she would not be standing in a row to be looked at. Wade rode up the lane, and the family rose from the good chairs, and Naomi came forward with Lavinia on her arm, and her whole face made up into welcome. And Wade Ashcroft took off his hat to them, courteous, and then he did not go to them. He turned the tall gray and rode past the swept yard and the good chairs and the girl in the blue wool, all the way across to the round pen, and he stepped down off the gray at the rail, 40 miles of diamond and 3 counties of cattle, and the note on the whole home place, standing there in a good coat with his hat in his hand. And he looked across the top rail at Cora Hollis in her mother's cut-down dress with her hand flat on the neck of a horse 3 men had quit on. The whole yard turned to look. Naomi's face was coming apart in pieces as the arithmetic reached her. Dutch Pharaoh had gone the color of tallow. Amos had risen from his chair and put a hand on the back of it to keep himself up. And into that gathered silence, across the rail, not touching her, the width of a top pole between them, the way it had been the width of a yard and a fence and a supper table for 9 days, Wade Ashcroft said the thing he had ridden up the lane in daylight to say where everyone could hear it. Cora Hollis defended me in this yard when your foreman called me a thief, he said, loud to all of them. Not to her. She fed me at that back step 9 nights running when this house wouldn't have me at the table. And she told a man she took for a penniless drifter that she'd sooner lose this ground clean than be handed across a table to clear a debt she never signed. He turned then and spoke to Cora alone, and dropped his voice, but the yard was so still it carried anyway. I'm not here to pick up your father's note, Cora. I wired the bank this morning. That note's your father's to carry or clear on his own, the way it always was, and I'll not touch it. Because you were right, a thing I hand you is a thing I own. I'm not here to rescue anybody. I'm here to make you an offer between the two of us as it stands. And you can throw it in the dirt in front of every soul on this flat, and I'll get on my horse and go, and no harm done to your father's paper either way. What offer? Cora said. Her voice was not quite steady. Her hand had gone still on the roan's neck. A partnership, Wade said. The diamond and this place run as two brands that keep their own names. Not a poor outfit swallowed by a rich one, a working agreement between two people who each bring a thing the other hasn't got. I've got grass and water and 40 men. You've got the best hands with a horse I have watched in my life, and I have watched a great many, and I've got no one on the diamond who can make an animal the way you make that roan. I'm asking you to make horses for the best watered range in the North Territory and run it beside me as an equal, on paper, your name on the brand, set first. And his throat worked, I'm asking, separate from all of it, so there's no mistaking the two, whether a woman who'd rather be met than lifted might one day let herself be courted by a man who finally understands the difference. Slow, in the open, with no note hanging over it. The two things are separate, Cora. You can take the partnership and refuse the man. I'd still rather have your horses and your honesty on my range than not. It is worth saying what Cora Hollis did in the long moment that followed, because the county has told it wrong ever since, told it as a swooning and a rescue and a poor girl's luck. And it was none of those things. She looked at the good chairs and the blue wool and her stepmother's ruined face, and she was not warmed by their comeuppance. She found she had no taste for it at all. She looked at her father holding the back of his chair to stay on his feet, and she thought about the $600 he would still owe on the 1st of December, which this man had just, in front of everyone, refused to take from her hands. Refused, she understood, because taking it would have made her a thing bought, and he had listened. He had actually listened. In the dark, by a wagon, to a woman telling a drifter the truth. And she looked last at the roan under her hand, the horse 3 men had quit on, and she had not. And she understood that Wade Ashcroft was not offering to lift her out of the barn. He was offering her a bigger barn, and a fair share of it, and her own name on the gate, and asking, separately and humbly, and in front of witnesses, so it could never be a secret purchase, whether she might in time want him too. The partnership, Cora said, and her voice steadied as she found the ground under it. I'll want in writing, and I'll want it read out by a lawyer who's mine and not yours. And I'll want my name first on the brand like you said, and I'll want it plain in the papers that my father's note is his own and no part of this, so that not one soul in this county can ever say I sold anything to get it. If it's all those things, then yes, I'll make horses for the diamond and I'll run my share of it beside you, and I'll not thank you for it. Because it isn't a gift, it's a trade. And I mean to earn every foal of it. Done, Wade said. All of it. Gladly, as for the other, she said, and here, only here, something in the flat gray eyes went soft at the edges, though her arms stayed folded and the rail stayed between them. You can come to supper. At the table this time, not the back step. And you can court me slow and in the open like you said. In front of God and Naomi and the whole nosy flat, and we'll see Wade Ashcroft, we will see, whether a man who'd ride 40 miles in a torn coat to hear the truth can stand to hear it every day for the rest of his life. Because I've got a great deal of it, and I don't intend to run short. I'm counting on the supply, Wade said, and for the first time in 9 days. Across the rail, in front of the whole county, the two of them smiled at each other at the same time, and the blue roan, bored with the pair of them, lipped the shining button of Wade's good coat and tried to carry it off, and the yard, which had been holding its breath since noon, laughed. A real laugh this time, not the awful warm laugh of the harvest supper. And the sound of it broke the thing that had been frozen over the flat all season. They were married in the spring of 1885 in the little frame church at Rycross, and Cora wore the gray dress, patched at the hip and above the knee, and dared anyone with a look to say a word about it. And no one did, because by then the whole county had learned what the dress meant and would sooner have insulted the church itself. Amos Hollis cleared his own note that December as it happened, and cleared it with money the home place made, because the first thing the partnership did was to open the Diamond's good creek water to the Hollis grass through a lease that Cora drew hard and fair, and the flat that had been all dust and no diamond ran green that next summer for the first time in 3 years, and carried cattle. Enough to answer the bank without $1 of it passing as charity through his daughter's hands. He signed the last of it himself, with his bad hands, at the Rycross Bank, and Cora stood beside him while he did it, and neither of them said a word about how near a thing it had been, or about the man who had refused to make it easy on purpose, so that the old man could keep the one thing a hard life had left him, which was the being able to say he had paid his own way. The partnership went into writing that winter, read out at the Rycross land office by a lawyer Cora hired with her own first quarter's fee, and not one that Wade so much as named to her. And it said exactly what she had asked it to say, plainly, in a hand any bank clerk could read. 2 brands and 2 owners, the Hollis grass and the Diamond water, leased each to the other at a fair rate set down, in figures, and the mark that went on the horses she made, carrying both their names, with hers set first. Wade signed it without reading past the top of the first page, and when Cora told him sharply to read the whole of a thing before he put his name under it, that a person who signs what they have not read has earned whatever they get, he laughed out loud, the first time she had heard him do it, and said that was the truest word anyone had handed him in a year, and he would have it burned over the door. And then he read every line of it slow, to please her, and let her see that it pleased her back. And the horses she made on the good water of the 2 Medicine Bench were inside of 3 years, horses that men came from 2 territories to stand and look at and go home poorer and satisfied, and every one of them left under a mark that carried her name ahead of his. And every buyer who took it for granted that the maker of such animals must be the big quiet man standing easy by the gate was corrected, mild and permanent, by the big quiet man himself, who never once tired of the correcting, and who the whole county came round to agreeing, the settled look of a man who had somehow fetched up with a great deal more out of life than he had any right to expect, and knew it to the bone, and mended his own gait anyhow. Naomi came round slower, the way frightened people do, and she and Cora never did become close, but a kind of hard respect grew up between them in place of the old warm cruelty, and it was Naomi, of all people, who kept the books for the Hollis brand after, and kept them honest, and never again wrote a herd count for a reader who had not come. Lavinia married a kind boy she'd liked all along, for no reason but liking him, and was so plainly relieved to have not been sold up that she cried at her own wedding for happiness, and let everyone think it was nerves. Dutch Pharaoh drew his time, and left before the first snow. And the last thing he said in the Hollis yard was that a place run by a woman and a horse fool wouldn't see 2 winters, and Pap Corn, who stayed on, was heard to remark that he'd take the woman and the horse fool over the man and the doubled rope any day of the year, and that a fellow who couldn't tell a frightened horse from a spoiled one probably couldn't tell much else either. And that was the end of Dutch Pharaoh in that country. The blue roan lived a long time, and never was much good for anything but the thing Cora had made him for, which was to be the horse that other horses learned from, calm and clever and quick to forgive, and he stole shining things off mantles and out of pockets his whole life. And everyone on both brands learned to check his stall when a thing went missing, and no one ever again mistook the fear in an animal or a person for meanness on any ground Cora Hollis had a say over. Years on, a young man came up the diamond lane looking for work, plainly dressed, on a tired horse, and found a big man in a good coat mending the bottom hinge of the gate by hand, and asked him, civil enough, where he might find the owner of the outfit to ask about day wages. Wade Ashcroft straightened up from the hinge and pointed with his chin across the yard to the round pen, where a woman in a gray dress with a patch at the hip stood in the middle of a cloud of dust, with her hand flat on the neck of a young horse coming apart and putting itself back together in its own good time. "She's out there," Wade said, "but you'd best wait till she's done. She'll want to look at your horse before she looks at you." He went back to the hinge, easy, a man with nothing left to prove, and everyone he wanted close by. And when you talk to her, he added, not looking up, tell her the truth the first time. She can tell. Saves everybody the trouble. The young man waited by the gate, hat in his hand, and watched the woman work the horse, and could not for the life of him understand why the owner of the biggest outfit in the north end of the territory was fixing his own gate with his own hands, like any hired hand off the road, could not know that the man liked mending that particular hinge, had mended it a dozen times. Because it was the gate a family had once come through to search his pockets, and it pleased him past telling to be the one who kept it swinging true. The young man knew none of that. He only knew that the pair of them, the woman in the pen and the man at the gate, kept looking up across the width of the yard at each other while they worked, a look going back and forth over the open ground between them the way it must have gone for years, and that whatever was in that look, a man would ride a long way and wear a torn coat a long time, to have somebody look at him like that, just once, and mean it.